review of Book One is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. One of his advocacy is treatment or obesity treatment, pioneering on mission to transform the lives of 100 million people battling this disease. No other than Mr. Ivan Nadler.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for having me.
Welcome back, Mr. Ivan. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure, I am a pediatric surgeon by training, and I got interested in weight management, specifically pediatric bariatric surgery, about 20 years ago. And I've spent the last 20 years advocating for children with obesity to get access to care, to get quality care, and I'm trying to spread the word to the masses because there's just not enough people out there willing to treat children with obesity. So that's why we're here.
Yes, indeed. And Mr. Ivan Nadler, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And hoping for more and more inspiring advocacy to the world. What are the most distinctive drivers of childhood obesity that differ significantly from adult obesity?
So that's a great question. The common sort of wisdom, conventional wisdom, is that obesity comes from poor diet and a lack of exercise. But in kids, they're not on the earth long enough for those two issues to really dictate the disease. So in children, it's really much more about one, their genes, two, the in utero environment that they uh, are developing in, and then three, sort of the environment they're born into, what kind of what kind of foods they're introduced to early on. There's one data point from a study that showed sugar exposure in the first 2 or 3 years really impacts the rate of diabetes and obesity in children. So it's a combination of all factors: genes, utero environment, and then the environment once you're born.
Interesting indeed, Mr. Ivan. And how does excessive screen time uniquely contribute to obesity risk in children compared to sedentary behavior in adults?
Yeah, so screen time's not good for either population, that's for sure, especially as it impacts sleep. Because if you look at your phone late at night, the screen itself, the blue light, uh, disrupts people's sleep. So it's really bad for obesity in adults and in kids. But in kids, obviously, there's even more time spent on their phones, scrolling through TikTok, um, listening to podcasts, which is good. Listen to this podcast, kids, if you're out there. But the point is that the screen time definitely impacts the sedentary behavior more so in children than in adults.
How are children specifically targeted by the food industry with the hyperpalatable, nutrient poor foods, and how does impact their developing bodies differently?
Yeah, that's a pet peeve of mine. In that, it's no coincidence that the three major fast food companies in America, McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's, have a clown, a puppet king, and a little girl with red hair and pigtails as their mascots. So these companies know that if they get children hooked early, that they will be uh, patrons for life. So there's unfair marketing to children. Even if you look at like cereal boxes, there's the Trix Rabbit, there's the Lucky Charms Leprechaun. These are all marketed to kids. And if you go through a supermarket, often you'll see the boxes with the most sugary cereal that are directly marketed to kids at the lower level of the shelf. so that the kids are eye level with it, so they see it and then they want it, and then they bug their parents to buy it, which is again a great marketing scheme for the companies, but really bad for children's health.
Mr. Ivan, why does socioeconomic status have even more profound impact on childhood obesity rates than adult rates?
So socioeconomic status is certainly important in both children and adults. And obesity is a disease that crosses all socioeconomic strata. So wealthy people have obesity, poor people have obesity. But especially in children, the people who are in disadvantaged communities don't have access to care. They don't have access to healthy foods, food deserts, and they often can't afford healthy foods. And so, again, it's sort of like the cumulative effect of the lack of this high quality nutrition, for instance, starting as a kid, and then it just adds up over time. So the children are definitely more impacted than socioeconomic status may impact adults. Although again, both are both kids and adults are more susceptible to obesity if they come from a socioeconomic status that's lower.
Interesting indeed, Mr. Ivan. And how can factors before birth and in infancy set the stage of childhood obesity?
The It's a question that I've spent a lot of time investigating as a researcher, and there are a couple of different ways. One is that the we've now seen data from both obesity and actually neurodivergent diseases or conditions where mothers who are either have diabetes or get diabetes during pregnancy, those children are at higher risk for obesity, diabetes, and now autism spectrum disorder. So development is critical, and most of the baby's organs are developed in the first trimester. So early nutrition is even more critical. And the way it works is, well, there are a couple of different mechanisms. One is something called hypothalamic imprinting, which means your part of your brain that determines appetite and your metabolism and fullness or satiety. It can be impacted by an in utero environment that isn't optimal. And then my research specifically looked at fat cells that shed genetic material from the mother that cross the placenta into the baby in utero and then cause those babies to have a higher fat content and a lower muscle content. And muscle is what controls your metabolism as well. So if you have too much fat and too little muscle, your metabolism is slow from the very get go.
Mr. Ivan, how does obesity specifically interfere with child's critical physical development?
The effects of obesity on children are multiple, but one of the sort of less well known factors that are affected is, as you mentioned, physical development. So there's an orthopedic um, condition called Blount's disease, where the legs start to bow because of the pressure of the weight while the growth plates are open. So it doesn't happen in adults who reach their full height, but if in kids who are growing, if they have excess weight, their legs can, they get bowed. And then those kids can't really exercise very well because it's painful and they don't have the skeletal, their skeleton isn't the way it should be, which then compounds the problem because they need to exercise to help weight loss. So obesity in children affects many organ systems, including the skeletal system, but obviously the mental toll, the mental health toll it takes if you can't exercise with your friends or can't play sports with your friends or whatever is an even huger problem that people don't necessarily think about.
Very well said, Mr. Ivan. Very well said. And why are we seeing conditions like type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and hypertension manifest decades earlier in these children they typically did in previous generation?
Yeah, I mean that's I think a compounding factor. So what happens? There's another sort of less well-known contributing factor, which is so genes when they are expressed, they can be modified by the environment. So when you have obesity, or for instance, if you eat ultra processed foods, you can modify some of the genes that you have and then those genes actually can get passed down from you to your kids. So there's this concept called the intergenerational transmission of obesity, which is part of the reason why these diseases are happening so much sooner than they used to, because the kids are already at risk as a fetus in utero, and then they start accumulating cell damage, you know, 3 years old, 4 years old, 6 years old, to the point where I personally have taken care of, 8 and 9 year olds with type 2 diabetes, which, as you said, that didn't happen, 10, 15, 20 years ago. That's new. So we really need, this is really a critical time for people to start thinking about childhood obesity more seriously, which again is why I'm here trying to spread the word.
How does the stigma and bullying associated with childhood obesity create a unique and often severe psychological scars compared to adults?
Yeah, I saw some data recently that showed that 40% of high school age children um, feel hopeless or depressed, and 30% of kids 13 to 18 feel loneliness. Now, that's not all tied to obesity, but having obesity certainly puts you at higher risk to have mental health issues. And I can tell you that one of the most gratifying things about what I do is watching kids go from sort of introverts or social outcasts or not really participating in their normal adolescent development to gaining confidence, gaining health, and re-entering society, really, because before, when they were at their highest weight, everybody around them could see their disease and thought of them as their disease. Whereas once they lost some weight, now people were just treating them as people, which is sad that that's the way it is. But that was their reality.
Indeed, that's the reality nowadays. Why is obesity is childhood considered stronger predictor of severe adult obesity and related health complications than obesity that develops later in life?
Yeah. So again, it's sort of like obesity is almost like smoking when we used to talk about smoking in pack years, where it's not just how many packs of cigarettes you smoke, but for how long you've smoked them. So with obesity, it's very similar. It's not just how big you are, or how heavy you are, or how high your BMI is, but it's how long your BMI has been at that level. So the longer you have a higher BMI, the bigger your health risk. So most kids who have obesity become adults with obesity unless they get treatment from me or someone else who does what I do or prescribes medications for obesity to children. And, that still aren't enough programs that do that or people that do that. So most children go on to adulthood with obesity and then carry the risk that they had as a kid with them into adulthood.
Mr. Ivan, as your mission to treat obesity in the world, what are your short term and long term goals?
Yeah, my long term goal is to basically educate the people, educate as many people as I can. Um, and the short term goals sort of tie into that. So I'm writing a book about obesity that is um, different than what most people are talking about these days, which is food addiction or food as medicine or lifestyle medicine. My book is completely different because my research and my experience shows me that those are maybe important in adults, but they're just not important for everybody. And they're certainly not that important in kids. Um, so, short term goal is get my book done, um, get more exposure for these ideas and this concept. And then hopefully that leads to a long term, not only getting the message to people, but getting people to understand that obesity is a disease and not a lifestyle choice, and that there are things you can do about it to help not only you, but the future generations.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Ivan, and looking forward for more success. What would be your piece of advice for those people that want to be have the same advocacy to the world?
The advocacy world is not easy, and you need to obviously be committed. You need to be resilient because there are lots of times where you get knocked down that you need to get back up. And so I think my biggest piece of advice would be for people who are interested in advocacy. And I think advocacy is actually really important these days, especially with all that's going on in the political world and in the world in general. Um, is you need, so the piece of advice is pick your passion and go for it and just keep at it until you get to your goals.
Definitely. And thank you so much for that advice, Mr. Ivan. And can you please recommend the books that influence your journey?
Yeah. So the book that's the most recent book I've read, which has sort of helped me um, in thinking about my book, is something called Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, which is by David Kessler, who was the former FDA commissioner. And his book is really mostly about food addiction, but it does talk a lot about how brain changes can affect um, people and how they eat and the way the new medications, the GLP-1 agonists, sort of counteract that food noise. So there's a lot of good information in there, but his focus is really on food addiction and not necessarily the big picture of obesity. And frankly, that's in part because um, he's a public health doctor, not a doctor who is taking care of patients with obesity on the daily. And a lot of his writing is his personal experience, which is great because the lived experience is super important. But I thought his book was a good read, and I definitely encourage people to read it and then go buy my book when it comes out, hopefully in a year or so. And then you can sort of pick and choose from the two different titles and see which pieces of it make sense to you.
Definitely. And thank you for that recommendation, Mr. Ivan. How must weight management approaches for children differ fundamentally from adult approaches to avoid harm?
Yeah, so obesity treatment in children is always a family affair. And if you don't treat the family, or at least educate the family, the kid isn't really going to get the best care possible. So if you can think about, like, if we're recommending to a kid that, you need to limit the number of sugar sweetened beverages you drink, but the parents stock the house with 2 liter bottles of Coke, that's really hard for the child. So everybody in the family needs to buy in, which isn't always the case with adults because adults sometimes live on their own. Sometimes they can have, their separate kitchens or separate food sources or whatever. But with kids, especially younger kids, they don't have really much control over the food they eat because they're not going out and buying it themselves. So that and the mental health support, which is important again in both um, adults and kids. But in kids, when again they have to go through this critical phase of both mental and physical development with a disease that they're wearing on their outside, getting the wraparound mental health support is also critical.
Mr. Ivan, what policies, marketing regulations to children improve school nutrition standards about sugary drinks and many more hold the most promise specifically for reducing childhood obesity?
Yeah, so I talk about this a lot, frankly, on media outlets because obviously the current administration has their ideas and they talk about it, you know, almost every day. And the reality is most of those proposals, most of those policies are going to take time to make an effect. Um, you know, I think when it comes to SNAP and eliminating sugary beverages from being available through SNAP, to me, without giving better access to healthy foods to those same people who are using that service, it really doesn't help to just remove the bad food. You have to give them access to the good food. Um, you know, same thing in schools. Schools need to have better nutrition because a lot of kids only get meals at school or get most of their meals at school. So you gotta make the school nutrition better as well. But you know, I think it's one step at a time, and we try to do. The administration tries to do what they can. We got a long way to go, but for me, the things that hold the most promise would be really getting better access to higher quality food that's affordable, but also access to care. So, getting more pediatric weight management programs to be developed across the country, especially in areas of need, rural areas, inner cities. Um, there's just need everywhere, really.
Affordable, for sure, affordable. And what innovative or system approaches show real promise in reversing childhood obesity trends?
Yeah, so I'm hopeful that telemedicine will increase access for kids who need weight management. And it can't be telemedicine sort of like the online companies that are in the news that people know about, where they're just sort of prescription factories. But I'm talking about like real telemedicine with, you know, remote mental health services and remote exercise services and remote nutritionists. Because I think it's just really difficult for lots of people, you know, rural or urban, you know, to go see your provider for weight management care. Let's say you have a half hour appointment, but it's an hour and a half out of your life because you have to drive a half hour and park and do whatever else, be seen, and then go back home. So I'm hopeful that as we move into this more remote age, which is something that COVID taught us, is that you could provide good medical care remotely. That will be one way that we can sort of expand access as long as it's quality access and really get more kids treated, and then hopefully also talk more about obesity prevention because both are important, and most of the policy stuff is actually better for prevention. So maybe these two things together can help us achieve the ultimate goal, which is reversing the obesity epidemic in general.
Mr. Ivan, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please to listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast law 101 and mental health 101. Love letters in third season, and my movie 101 review and music 101 in fourth season, and science 101 and sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Mr. Ivan, if you could implement one societal or policy change tomorrow, what is the biggest potential impact on reducing childhood obesity and what would it be?
Well, if I had to pick one, be tough because a lot of work needs to be done. But I might actually pick something that prohibits discrimination against people with obesity, including children with obesity. Um, Now, that won't necessarily impact childhood obesity rates, but again, if people realize that obesity is a disease and not a lifestyle choice, then the shame and the blame that goes with obesity would be um, diminished, hopefully eradicated, and we would have a chance to have these kids and adults live happier and healthier lives, um, which ultimately would lead to decreased childhood obesity rates if we get everybody to understand that it's a disease and that you can get treatment and that you can make yourself healthier and decrease the risk of passing it on to your kids. That's sort of the ultimate aim.
Mr. Ivan Nadler, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your podcast, your advocacy, or any projects that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so please visit my YouTube channel, which is Obesity Explained. My website, which you see there, is Obesity Explained. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, just starting TikTok, although I don't really know how to use it. Um, but I intend to get my book out there soon, and then I'll be hitting everybody with the media blitz to talk about what we're talking about here today.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Ivan Nadler because if you support him for sure, more and more and more empowering episodes of the podcast itself, more and more empowering advocacy about obesity will rise. So, Mr. Ivan, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon.